Well, hello and welcome to the first interview episode of Answers from the Stairs. And I am your host, Chris Vester. And I've got with me someone that probably before the conversation we just had no idea how much he influenced just getting to this spot. This idea of a podcast that started out as walks around my farm talking to a selfie gimbal, giving my opinions that probably nobody cared about. But you invited me on a trip a few years ago, and we had lots of conversation then. And you were part of a group of men that met together about once a week to have some discussion. And the idea of it actually turning into a book came from that group of men. And Mr. Scott Gunnel, president of JM&A, welcome to the podcast Answers from the Stairs.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Proud of you for continuing on this journey. What folks in the audience don't know is some of the intimate details of what this journey looked like for you to get to where you are, and which is super cool because I know your vision has always been just to share your experiences and to help others grow. And when people are vulnerable to that degree, you get a lot of people that might challenge you or might want to contradict or, in some regard tear you down, and you've persisted. And so I'm happy to be here. I'm super proud of you for doing this. And I'm humbled to be your first, I guess, conversationalist guest. So
yeah, I'm excited. And what I have decided to do is to get people to tell their stories of their journey of personal development or what I call, walking up these never ending stairs. I literally say, hey, what's your birthday?
My birthday is November 6th.
What year?
1978.
78.
Yeah.
So I want to start there.
Okay.
I know you can't remember that far back, but from that point, I mean, you're a born, raised, and always been in Florida, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I was born in Palm Beach Gardens, and grew up. So at the time when I was born, my parents were living in Tequesta, which is a small town north of the West Palm Beach area. And they migrated around Florida, South Florida primarily. Most of my years living in Boca Raton, but I've lived in all over the state: Tampa, Sarasota, Tallahassee. I've lived in Georgia for a period of time, but the majority of my time has been spent in Florida.
Gotcha. And do you remember the first paying job you ever had? And let's say not even that. It doesn't have to be paid because, I worked for my dad when we were farming, and the pay was the roof over my head. It's the statute of limitations for child labor law way beyond that. So, I was there helping him in the farming aspect. Do you remember the first real job you ever held?
So yes, and I'm gonna answer this two ways. One, I would say I grew up in a similar capacity that you did, where I'm one of three. I have a brother and a sister, and there was many life tasks delegated to us that you would treat as a job. But you're right, there wasn't necessarily compensation. Your compensation, and my parents were very good to me, just like yours were to you. So, but my first paying job was I would sweep tennis courts in the neighborhood we lived in. And I am trying to remember off the top of my head. I think I got paid like 275 an hour. And most of the time it wasn't even an hour's worth of work. And so I mean it literally was, but you had to water the courts, sweep the courts, line the courts. That was my first job.
What made you and how old were you, and what made that be the first job? Like what drew you to that thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if my memory is correct, I was probably 11. So that's the first thing. And it was kind of two reasons why. One, I always wanted to work and to earn money, because the way I was raised by my parents was, you would earn an allowance, you would do certain things, and that was the money you had. So I always wanted to supplement that money. Two, I got to drive a golf cart, and I was too young. In today's world, I'm sure liability insurance would never have allowed for an 11-year-old kid to be doing this. It wasn't, I mean, the golf cart wasn't that glorious, but I had the ability to drive a golf cart, which equated to some freedom. And so those were the two motivations that I had.
Sure. I
Yeah.
mean, you think about it. I mean, money and freedom is what a lot of people choose.
That's exactly right. I mean, it started young.
So at 11 years old, sweeping tennis courts, was there anything you learned from that job at 11 that you carry into now, which is a
Absolutely.
drastically different job, right?
Absolutely. So first of all, self-discipline, because there was certain times of the day you had to water the courts and sweep the courts. And if you didn't do it at those times, you would impact players' ability to play on the courts. And there was a few times as I was getting started in there, I wasn't as disciplined. So you'd have to get up really early in the morning or you'd have to go later at night. And I wasn't as disciplined as I could and met or didn't meet some of the timelines, which unfortunately impacted, play for people that were signed up to play. So there was a big lesson around discipline, organization, being on time. There was also a dependency lesson where you realize that, albeit it was somewhat trivial work, but there's a dependency that people have that they're just going to show up and the court's going to be in the condition that they expect it to be in. And if you fail to do what's expected of you, you're disrupting somebody else's life. So there was a lot of lesson there. And I would say finally, there was a lesson around independence because there's a lot of times like, oh, I'm going to go drive the golf cart around the neighborhood, or I'm going to go, explore beyond the boundaries that were set for me. And I did some of that, but there was, it's interesting. I think as you get freedom, you realize that you can have discipline within freedom. And as a young child, you freedom and discipline don't always align the way we would like to think they should. So it was, I would push the boundaries at times and other times I wouldn't. And I think there were some good lessons coming out of that, that just because you get more freedom doesn't mean you have to abuse the freedom.
Good. That's good. That's real
Yeah.
good, actually. Do you like, I know you FSU 2001 graduate.
Yeah.
So that's a big gap between 11 and graduating college. Any
Yeah.
significant job stops or like,
So yeah, there was interesting. So I also worked at a boat dock, refueling boats, primary duty. I mean, we had a rental fleet as well, so you would do some preparation for that. I worked, so that was, in my adolescent days, and then I detailed cars. I did some sprinkler work, believe it or not. So it was a random odds and ends stuff. I played sports, and you played sports, and so growing up, if you're going to camps during the summer, if you're at school, it takes a lot of your time. But there was a lot of odd jobs. When I got to college, I worked my whole way throughout college. I worked in a nutrition store. For the listener's point of view, Chris and I share a lot of commonality in health. So I worked in a nutrition store. I also worked as a bouncer in a bar. And then finally, and this was probably one of the biggest, I would say, activities that shaped my life is a friend of mine in college and I started a valet parking company. And it was interesting because we studied the market and to figure out where's there a business we could start that has a low barrier to entry being there's not a lot of competition and there's not a lot of startup costs. And it is the story where I had a vehicle I sold. I took the proceeds from the vehicle, bought a much less expensive vehicle, and took the difference. And we started the business, which wasn't a lot of money at that point in time. And we were the first contracting valet parking company in Tallahassee. Now there was some restaurants that had their own valet parking. We were the first ones that that were out contracting to do this. And there was so many lessons learned from that. And it was so cool because I employed all my friends. We made decent money. So for a college kid, I had a fair amount of money, but it wasn't, tremendous earnings. But I learned a lot. And that to me from a work experience perspective, and I'm sure you have some questions and we could
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
more about it. Yeah.
I'd love to talk about that because
Yeah.
that's a part of your story that, like I said, I don't know all of your story.
Yeah.
So like you said, you looked in the market, the low barrier of entry, not a lot of competition, which is the smartest place to go in business,
Right.
right? Um, but what did that look like? What did that business itself look like? How did you employ everybody? What's the
Yeah.
model there?
So it's interesting. So the model is, or was, I should say, a long time ago. I haven't really kept up with it today, but the model was that for hiring folks, to me, that was probably the easiest part because we just had, friend groups and networks throughout college. And what we would do is we would guarantee them an hourly rate. We would pool all the tips together, and whatever the hourly rate that was guaranteed, if it was less than that, we would make up the difference. If it was more than that, they kept all of it. And that was the primary model of compensation. Now, when you get into private party work is unique because you basically have two waves of business: when everybody arrives and when everybody leaves. The way you make money is you're charging the business the whole time the rate. In the middle, you send people on their way and they come back. So if it's a 4 hour event, they might really only work 2 hours and for 2 hours. So in that case, you guaranteed a better rate just because there was more logistics involved. But from a business perspective, what we did is we really built a value proposition, and the value proposition was really around convenience, was around vehicle safety for that matter, because people had to trust you in their cars. We had to have all the necessary insurance, just like the garage keeper insurance you have at your dealerships. We had where I'm insuring people to drive other people's cars. There was a lot of logistic planning just around the lot where we would park. And we, my partner and I were very young at that point, and we didn't know what we didn't know, but we were very curious and we weren't afraid to talk to people, which I think are two very
Mm.
important skill sets in life, by the way. And so we went out and we were able to sign restaurants. As you know, Tallahassee's the state capital, so we signed lobbyists that hosted a lot of events and parties. The Governor's Club, which is a well-known club, we did parking for. We did parking at the stadium, and we built a nice little business there. And so it was just a lot of hard work. And what was really cool is we gave our friends the ability to, we started with one account primarily. And so we were heavily involved. But as we scaled the business, we were able to take friends and they would run certain accounts. And so they were getting a leadership opportunity because they would have
Wow.
to schedule staff, do all the work associated with it. Um, so it was neat.
That's that's pretty cool. How long did you do that? Because I know you went to work in 2005 with SCT. So was that like you said you
So
started that while you were in school?
yeah, we did. So we did it it was about 3 years. So it carried a little bit on after graduation. And what we expanded the business back down to South Florida. We picked up some business down here. And unfortunately, after 9/11, the property and casualty insurance premiums grew to, you know, absorbent amounts. And we were we were going up. There's a it's called Meisner Park in Boca Raton. It's a city within a city concept. And the irony is, a good friend of my father's ran a company called USA Parking, and they were a nationwide valet outfit. They self-insured, and we got to the final round of bidding on this. It was us and him. And he ultimately won the account because his cost structure was way different because of the scale and being self-insured. And at that point, we realized, this we're hamstrung to grow this business, and so we sold both pieces. We sold the south end in South Florida and the north end in Tallahassee to two different valet operators. We some competition came in the market up in Tallahassee after we launched. So, and then I jumped into the retail car business after that, and I was in retail um, for I sold cars. It's one of these stories, Chris, where I sold cars and I thought I knew everything. I went and became a used car wholesaler. got my
Mhm.
teeth kicked in, went back to
Yeah.
selling cars. And then I got hired on to JM Family in 2003, late 2003, actually at JM&A in the career development program. So I didn't have F&I experience. So they put me in a store. And I was very fortunate. I went to a Toyota store on the west coast of Florida where the dealer was just a wonderful operator, business person in the car business, and taught me so much about the business.
About business as a whole, or just the automotive space?
Both.
Gotcha.
And so that's why I said businessman in the car business.
Right.
So, taught me, and listen, I had some experience working for myself in the valet parking business, but we didn't have, our overhead was minimal. I mean, our cash flow was very simple and it was just a very simple business. You get in the car business and you really start to understand cash flow and the importance of cash. And you know that very well, based on you operating dealerships. So I learned a lot about expense management and just the value of speed in transactions and understanding, how to motivate people differently than what I had just learned on my own. And I learned about transparency in business. He was a
Mm.
very empowering, transparent dealer where the leadership team, all managers met frequently and we all owned our respective departments and had to report out, on what was working, what wasn't working, and seeing the ownership of that was critical lessons for me.
Yeah, because you touched on two things, right? You while ago, as you were creating your own business,
Mhm.
you talked about the value of curiosity.
Yep.
Um, and then the inside working in someone else's business, the idea of owning what you've been placed in charge of.
Yep.
And one of the things that I see and have had lots of conversations about with guys that are in, I'll say the automotive space because that's what I'm in, right?
Yeah.
Is those that want to be dealers, like the number one thing I'll say is you've got to be curious.
Yep.
You've got to be wondering, hey, what else do I need to be learning in this moment? And then taking ownership of whatever's under your feet right then. And
100%.
that could be someone that's invariable, but they're having a conversation with the service department and fixed operations about something, like understanding how it all plays together. In other words, when your feet are in that service department, begin to take ownership of your part of the fixed operations department. And I don't know, like you have it naturally. I mean, that's part of like why you are where you are now is there's this natural curiosity. And you said it, I learned how to take ownership of something. I, do you think that's something that can be taught, or do you think it's a natural? Because we haven't talked about your like we talked a little bit about your parents and your family,
Yeah.
but your father was in the car business,
He
so
was, yeah.
you got to watch him go through the grind of automotive.
Sure.
But so do you think it was something that innately you caught from him, or because I'm glad you brought up curiosity because I think it's one of the best, most important traits when it comes to business.
I agree. So today, with my 46 years of experience, I would tell you curiosity and emotional intelligence are the most important. And we could talk about that in a minute. If you go back to your question about curiosity, I don't know the answer. And because I was definitely born with it. So, my lens is and I don't know. And I'm one of these people, I don't remember the early days of childhood. I remember like probably 5, 6 years old on. My nickname was Dennis the Menace. And it was because I was so curious and I just never knew when to stop asking questions. And so that's who I was. But I've seen people today or over time understand the value of curiosity and attempt to be curious. And the thing I would say, Chris, about curiosity today is the barrier to entry is so low. And I have so many mentors in life and business in the world, and many of them are, in the stacked rank hierarchical or junior to me. They're just incredibly smart people. And I remember one day I was talking to one of our associates who's one of these mentors I'm describing, and we were frustrated just about people not being curious. Or I'm sorry, no, that wasn't the case. We were talking about a problem, and he just Googled it. Literally, just picked up the phone and Googled it. And next, we start reading all these articles about this problem, and within 5 or 10 minutes, we were down this path of a solution that we were frustrated about. And so I talked to the leadership team. Like, if you don't know the answer, especially with ChatGPT today, and there's so many things, I don't know if you're like me. I use ChatGPT all day long. I'll hear a word I don't know. I can't remember the exact meaning. I'm looking it up. I want to understand more about, investing in some capacity, because to your point, we're in the car business. We know what we know because we do it every day. There's a lot of tangential aspects of business around us and so I look a lot of things up. I've been a current events junkie my whole life. I like the news. I like to absorb information. So, but it's really important. Curiosity, I think, is going back to the leadership principle aspect of curiosity is important, because curiosity represents that A, you have an opportunity to learn. B, there's more information out there than what you have. And and I would say C is it it's this it's vulnerability. It's this aspect of, hey, I don't know everything, give me more. And so I think curiosity represents a lot more than that, than just purely the act of going to seek and get information.
Yeah, that's good. And you mentioned emotional intelligence.
Oh yeah. If I could turn my camera around right now, I would show you. I have the emotional intelligence pyramid on my whiteboard right behind me to remind me every day. Is if you give me the opportunity to take someone with high IQ and high EQ, I'm hiring the person with high EQ, because the fundamental fact is you can't have a thought without an emotion. It's how we're wired as human beings. And the our ability to be self-aware. So that's the grounding principle of EI is self-awareness, and really understanding that we all are good at certain aspects of life and we're not good at others. Everybody. And and then working through the channels of emotional intelligence, the more you can harness your strength and understand where your trigger points are and where your areas of deficiency exist, allow you to be comfortable with the person that you are. And it is that foundation for growth, going back to curiosity. And to me, and within I think self-awareness is the biggest aspect of it. I know I just mentioned that, but if you really own yourself, you can build and grow. But if you're not willing to accept the raw truth of who you really are, you're fooling yourself to think that you can lie to yourself and you can try and bolt on other capabilities. You got to get to the root. And then there's social awareness. There's other aspects of EI that are critically important. But for me, my personal bend is self-awareness. There's nothing better to me than someone coming in my office and going, you know what? I didn't handle this as well as I could have. And here's what I'm going to do differently in the future. Versus you having to engage that discussion with, how do you think you did there? And they're telling you, I think I did pretty good. And you have a different thought. And now you have to try and convince them.
Okay.
Leaders waste so much time trying to convince people that there's opportunity for them to improve. So yeah, I digress. I know I can get
No,
on a
that's
tangent
good.
about that, but
That's
yeah.
good. And we're going to circle back to the businessman in the car business, but before I go there, that idea of self-awareness, one of the things that I've used in our business is like a 360 review.
Yep.
Right. So everybody kind of gets to tell you what you can't see.
Yep.
But in my life, I think the best 360 review that I've ever received is the one that I gave my family. I mean, you're married, have 2 children, and letting your spouse and your children tell you how they see you can be really heartbreaking, right? But will make you ridiculously self-aware if you're prepared to take the answers.
Yeah.
And you nodded when I said a 360. So is that something that you've ever tried, like giving out a 360 or taking a 360 from those that wash your clothes and things like that in your life?
I've never done a formal 360 with my family, which is a great idea, and I will do that because that's a great idea. I haven't even thought through that. Um, I do get what's interesting. I do get a lot of feedback from my family, and I want to talk about just feedback for just a second.
Mhm.
And I think anybody listening to this should think, how often do people come up to them and give them feedback? And if the answer of the question is not that often, then you're probably not creating an environment for it. And so I get a ton of feedback. And I laugh about it and I joke about it because I try and create comfortable environments for people to give me feedback because I want the feedback. And just so you know, there's a simple way to do it: stop, start, continue. What should I stop doing? What should I
Mhm.
start doing? What should I continue doing? Really simple. So it doesn't have to be overly formal. And I get a lot of feedback and I laugh because at times it's people are so comfortable giving me feedback that you find where you can get yourself an analysis paralysis. And the next thing you know, you're overwhelming yourself with all these opportunities. And I caution people to that because there's a healthy balance of recognizing who you are and what's really realistic that you can improve upon. So back to your question at home, I do get a lot of feedback, and you know my wife Danielle, and it's great feedback. I would say some of the best feedback I've received in my life is from her because she knows me in the most raw setting. At work, we're at work, and we have to. There's a certain level of decorum that has to exist. So, but that's a good idea about the 360 at home.
Just be prepared.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not prepared. Probably
Yeah.
just
So
yeah,
like that. And then asking your children to describe you in one word, like that can hurt your feelings. At least
yeah,
the first time I did that, it hurt my feelings really bad.
yeah,
But man, that's great. Like the idea of like self-evaluation
yeah,
and self-reflection and truly understanding, who you are,
yeah.
and even more so, like you say, your family knows you at your rawest, and that's where the real you gets exposed the
That's
most.
exactly right.
Um, my goal is to always be integrous. So I want to be the same person at home that I am at work. And that can be somewhat difficult, right?
It's tough.
And but when the real you comes out under the pressure and it's at home, they can give you some great feedback.
Totally.
Um, we had touched on for a second the mentor you had that was a businessman in the car business, and you worked for him for how long? How long were you with him?
About 18 months. So here's the interesting thing. I worked at his dealership for about 18 months. And then later on in my career, I was his district manager when I was with Southeast Toyota. And so I had multiple versions of him through different, but he was always a teacher mentor to me. So, and I was always a student to him.
And carrying those lessons into when you started working for, I think you said 2003 is when you started with JMNA. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Um, and the best that I could find was, like sales admin, manager of sales administration, to to like wait. There's a long list of things you've
Yeah.
done between now and then. But what was your first role at, with JMNA?
So actually and I'm sorry if I confused this earlier. My first role was I was hired to go into a dealership to be an F&I manager to learn the business. That was actually my first
I got you.
job. So
Okay.
I did that. And when I came to JM Family to try and get a job, you needed retail experience I'm sorry, let me back up. I originally wanted to start at JM Family and I needed retail experience. And so I went to sell cars in hopes that I could get into Southeast or to JM&A wherever I could find a spot. Selling cars was the best thing I could do for my automotive career because listen, I came out of college and many of my friends were working normal 9 to 5 jobs. And this was back in the day. Chris, you recall when you worked 6 days a week, if not seven, you had one Sunday off a month and one day during the week. And, if you missed that day, you'd lose half deals, all those different things. And so you just grounded. And that was tough. It was a tough experience. And so I digress a minute. I'll go back to my career. So sold cars, went and did F&I. Again, I did some used car wholesaling in that mix. Then I went to Southeast Toyota as a trainer, then a district manager, two territories. Came to JM&A in 2010. Forrest Heathcott, who I worked for at Southeast Toyota, was the president of JM&A, and there was an opportunity for me here. So I came over and I've been with JM&A ever since.
And I want to walk through some of those wins that you've had, because like, you're not moving forward if you're not winning, right? But you touched on the used car wholesaling and how you got your teeth kicked in. Some of the best lessons are learned in moments of defeat. Suzanne and I made the mistake of buying a gym first, and then buying a gym from a friend of mine second, and then taking his word for the performance rather than the actual data
Yeah.
third. Like, that was the trifecta of mistakes in our life in that one area. But I learned a lot. What'd you learn from the used car wholesaling? You said, and I'm not using your words, getting your teeth kicked in. Like, what did you learn from getting your teeth kicked in there?
Well, so first of all, is there's so much that goes into evaluation of the car. So the teeth kicked in was me not so understanding if there was any damage in the vehicle, if there was paint work on the vehicle, what was the based on, and this was back in the day where you didn't have all the technology you have today. So the auction report was a printed out report. You had to get there early and go look at the vehicle. And then thinking, so I was a good negotiator in the lane because it was still the live auction where
Yeah.
the cars were running through the lane and the auctioneer and realizing that the auctioneers had people that they were trying to drive up the value, and you could get caught in the emotional moment of paying too much for a car. The first car I bought by myself on the lane was what I had a pre-sold car, and I went out to the lot to see it before, but I didn't do a comprehensive walk around. And we get to the lane and it's there, and I'm like, oh, I'm all excited. I need to buy this car. So I bought it. And after it pulling off the line to go check it out, there was rock damage all over the front. And it was a color that you couldn't really see it. It was interesting. It was like this off green color. And so, literally, the first car I ever bought, and this customer was very clear about it can't have any paint work. Well, the only way it doesn't have paint work right now, but the only way it's going to be to your standard is if it gets paint work. And so I had to, I had to deal with this customer and find a happy medium there. And it cost me a lot of money because it was my own business at that point. But there's just a lot of lessons around all of the detail that goes into being successful and not rushing. And so me becoming a wholesaler was me rushing to think I was good at something when I had no business at that point doing that.
I've spent a year on the road, used car acquisitions for our group. And yeah, like, I've got 3 or 4 stories where you run up on a car in a hurry. And then when it gets home, the side of the car, you never, because I was the same way as you. I would go in early, like, I knew my list, had my little black
Yep.
book, all that.
Yep. Yep.
And I would go from lane assignment to a lane assignment, knowing what cars I was looking for. And then something would catch my eye, and I would hear where we were price wise and kind of get an idea. Hey, this is going to be a deal. And only on 2 occasions, but 2 occasions when the car drove out of the lane, the side of the car that I hadn't seen, because I woke up and I came into the lane late, and there's damage all the way down one side. And you're like, that's why it was a deal,
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of lessons there.
I would say the best one was they had pulled the next car up in the lane, but they were still closing out the previous car. And I bought a car I never saw because I didn't realize. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is such a deal. Look at this car in the lane. And it wasn't even that car. They hadn't even started that car yet. Yeah. So it's great.
those are the lessons that don't make your resume,
Right.
but they never leave your life resume, right?
That's
You
exactly
just
right.
know, right?
Yeah.
But you said selling cars is the best for your automotive career. What about that do you think you bring into your position now? I mean, being president of JM&A, and you're saying, okay, well, but in the automotive space, being a salesperson was what I would say is the best for my automotive career. Because I mean, JM&A is still automotive, like it's rooted automotive, but it's not
100%.
selling cars. So how do you see that playing out for you in that?
So I would say it's a couple things. One, I believe in order to be successful in a business, you have to understand the toughest facets of the business. And selling cars is tough. And so starting at the proverbial ground floor of sales and by selling cars was I was able to learn so much about the dealership operation, what makes a good salesperson, what makes a not so good salesperson, going back to the discipline we talked about earlier, leveraging the tools. And, the worst thing that happened to me was I sold a bunch of cars my first month. And I thought I knew what I was doing. And that actually turned out to probably be the best thing that happened to me because then you realize that, and then, the aspects of making gross profit versus volume. So that was a big component that helps me today because I believe that I still can relate to the transaction and I can relate to all the dynamics around the transaction. And I'm not naive to think a lot's changed since I was selling cars or I did F&I for that matter. But I know what it was like to be humiliated. I knew what it was like to fail. I knew what it was like to be surprised about someone that bought a car that I never thought they would bought a car when we first started talking. I knew what it was like to deal with managers that didn't have great EI. I knew what it was like to deal with managers that did. And so all the factors that make up, the realities of the business today, it helped me. The other thing was the consumer. And you really learn about a lot about people when you sell cars, my opinion. And Mr. Moran, one of the premises of our founding is the value of our people. And we refer to at JM our associates are associates, not employees, and the family aspect of it. And we only have two hands, and that was something I always had said. It's the people around us that do it. And you I had to learn a lot about different types of people and how they interact and they don't trust you in car sales. And they're nervous and anxious and there's all those things. And so to me it was a great lesson in trying to get to know people quickly, trying to build value quickly and trying to make them comfortable in the situation that we're in, comfortable enough that they're willing to give me enough time to ultimately help them in the purchase of a vehicle. And those lessons today are still paying dividends for me when it comes to managing people, dealing with dealers, their the interrelatability at the floor level. And you never lose sight of that. Mr. Moran, it all starts with the sale of a car. It all starts with the sale of a car. And so we can never lose sight of wherever we are in the automotive business. We have to remember that if a car's not sold, everything that goes along with it doesn't exist.
And I can tell you one of the things that I enjoy about being in your company is your passion about what you do. Like I've been around you in multiple different settings and you are passionate about your family, right? And you're passionate about the space you operate in.
Yeah.
What do you think drives, I know what drives your passion about family, so I'm not going to ask about that. That's super clear. What do you think drives your passion for the automotive space so that you are in the position you're in now and have as much influence in the space that you do now? Like, where do you think that comes from?
I would say I thrive on improvement. I would start there. So we talked about self-improvement, but I also thrive on business improvement. I love to me, strategic agility is very important. So strategic agility, you and I were talking earlier about, connecting the dots. So it's seeing what's happening today and understanding how the play can unfold and influencing the outcome of that. So it's connecting the dots of what's true today, what needs to be true in the future, and how do you get there. And I have strong convictions that if we create the right environment, and so when I speak into the environment, if people feel psychologically safe, they can show up being the person they are, they're empowered, they're very clear on the vision and mission, they have the resources, and they can use their voice to speak up, we can accomplish anything. And so I'm very passionate about how do we make car dealers better? Because car dealers made me better. And I love cars. And so I'm very passionate about improvement in business, but my passion is people improving while the business improving. So there's this seamless simultaneous activity taking place. And so I see my role today as, yes, I'm passionate and I'm an inspirational leader. That's just my style. But my inspiration comes through seeing a group of associates. At JM&A, we have 902, I think, right now. At 902 associates being aligned to a mission and vision and being empowered and walking us down paths of growth. That inspires me. And Chris, it's just how I'm wired. I don't know, everybody's got different wirings. And I think that's just, for me, I thrive on improvement and I'm so curious and I think anything's possible. And there's a lot of naivety in there and there's a lot of failure in there. But I'm a glass is half full type of person and, let's find an obstacle and we'll overcome it. And, we're going to stub our toe along the way. But I just think there's a lot of possibility in automotive. I just think there's a lot and we're very dealer centric. So we do it to how can we help our dealers be better at what they do, knowing we're not perfect.
So as we wrap up, because I do want to be cognizant of your time, if someone's listening to this and they've heard you go from sweeping tennis courts to the president of a company with 900 associates, what do you want them to take away?
I want them to take away, and forgive some redundancy of the message here. I want them to take away, first of all, that hard work, a wonderful attitude, curiosity, and emotional intelligence can get you so far. I want them to take away that there's no ideal path. Your path is your path, and you have the ability to shape that path. So people often ask, how do you get to where you are and how could I get to where you are? Well, your journey is going to look different than my journey. You have to optimize your journey. You have to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And you have to find people that can help you. So if you recognize your strengths and opportunities, put yourselves, I believe, if you want to climb a tree, hire a squirrel, not a dog. Now, there might be some dogs that coon hounds that can climb trees, and I get it, but let's live in the 80, 90%. Put yourselves in positions where you can succeed and be honest with yourself about what you're not good at to have people help you succeed. And if you create that environment where people are comfortable being in your presence and they're willing to share radical truth with you, you will be successful, however you measure success, whatever it looks like. There's a lot of successful people in the world that are much more successful than me that do much more impactful things in the world than I'm capable of doing. So it's not all about money. It's not all about career growth. Impact is a very wide, broad term. And so I think if that's the mantra I've followed, and I've had a lot of smart people in my life that have educated me around that. And that's, and I'm fortunate, and I still have a lot to learn, a lot. And if I didn't have some of the great people in my life I have today, I wouldn't be able to do this job the way I do the job. So that would be my closing thoughts.
That's a great thought. A great thought. And you started off by telling me that you were proud of this journey of mine. I'm proud of you being where you're at. I can tell you the overwhelming response and conversations I've had with people is like you being in that position has been a very positive thing, and they see positivity coming from it. So, and there's been some good leaders at JM&A. You mentioned Forrest, man. He was one of my favorite people in this space. Period.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. Mike Casey, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't these people. Hank Rooms at Southeast Star, Dan Chaper. I mean, I could go down the list of people, Brent Burns, that I wouldn't be where I am. Colin Brown, Mr. Moran, you name it. But I do want to say one thing about you before I go. So the answer's from the stairs, just for everybody listening. So when what would happen is Chris in the morning would exercise, and he is the most disciplined workout person I've ever met. So part of answering the stairs, I was fascinated how every freaking day he was doing this. But it was 2, 3, 4 minute, whatever clips of stuff that was on his brain that I would listen to on my way to work, wherever I was, and it would make me better in the day. And I remember I would ask you, like, where do you come up with this stuff? And you'd just be like, well, it's just what I'm thinking about. And you're very curious and you study the game and you do so much to teach and educate yourself and surround yourself with good people and all those facets. And and it was fascinating to me how you were able to translate that into small bits of information that could be so impactful. And it was so much wisdom there. And so I would encourage anybody listening, go listen, read the book, go listen to all those because and the other thing is you would be walking and doing this like or you'd be exercising. I'm out of breath. I don't know how you get that physical stamina. And so really cool that you're taking it this far. But somebody should do an answer with the stairs interviewing you because that would be interesting to hear as well, getting to this point.
Yeah, it is funny. Like I felt like after 300 and I think it was 349 episodes of that, which is like 29 hours of content. I thought people really got tired of hearing me speak.
Well, it was
But
always different, so it wasn't the same. That's what was. It was just a wide swath of content. So yeah.
well, man,
So kudos to you.
I appreciate that feedback, and you, and again, you have no idea of even just simple words of encouragement. I mean, like when I handed you the book, we were in, I think it was Italy last year when I got your copy, or 2 years ago, and I gave you the copy of the book, and your first question was, "Hey, when are you going to start walking around that farm again? And let's get some content."
Seriously, I'm serious.
And I was like, I think I'm going to go a different direction. That doesn't mean that I won't be doing some of that, but
you need to do some of that.
I want to hear other people's journey of those stairs. The whole idea is, I made a joke. I took a picture of my stair mill and I said, I heard there's answers at the top of this thing, and because you never get to the top.
Right.
I don't know that you ever have all the answers, but to your point, if we stay curious and we listen to feedback, like there's so much to be gained from that. And I don't know that there ever is a top. And
there's not. There's no such thing.
And thank you so much for your time with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.